You've been lied to your entire life about what's inside the Hermitage Museum. They told you these marble statues are the pinnacle of human artistic achievement. They told you master sculptors of the 18th and 19th centuries created these neoclassical masterpieces. They told you to admire them, photograph them, move along. They prayed you'd never bring a measuring tape. I did. And what I discovered will shatter everything you thought you knew about history, art, and the very nature of the beings who once inhabited this planet. It started innocently enough. October 2019, St. Petersburg. I was walking through the marble halls of the State Hermitage Museum like millions of tourists before me, room after room of quote one statues, Apollo, Venus, Hercules, dying warriors, triumphant athletes, the usual parade of white marble bodies frozen in eternal perfection. But something felt wrong. I'm not talking about intuition or mysticism. I'm talking about proportions. As someone with 12 years of figure drawing and anatomical study, I notice bodies. I notice how heads relate to torsos, how arms hang relative to hips, how the human skeleton dictates unavoidable ratios that every artist, no matter how skilled, must respect. These statues didn't respect them. At first, I dismissed it. Artistic license, right? Neoclassical idealization. The Greeks elongated figures for aesthetic effect. Everyone knows that, except I was looking at a statue supposedly created in 1782 by a Russian sculptor named Fedot Shubin, not ancient Greece, the 18th century, an era when anatomical study was mandatory in art academies, when dissection of cadavers was routine, when artists knew exactly what human proportions looked like because they measured them from actual human bodies. So why did this statue, a marble portrait of Prince Alexander Golitsyn, have a head that was proportionally too small for its body? I stood there for 20 minutes trying to convince myself I was seeing things. The museum was closing, I left, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 days later, I returned. This time, I brought a measuring tape, a notebook, and a small laser distance measurer I'd purchased from a hardware store. I looked like a tourist taking detailed photos. Nobody stopped me. I started with the Apollo Belvedere replica in the Hall of Ancient Sculpture. Total height 224 centimeters from base to crown. Head height from chin to crown, 23 centimeters. I did the calculation right there on my phone. 224 divided by 23 equals 9.7A. Head-to-body ratio of 1 to 9.7. Do you know what the human head-to-body ratio is? It's 1 to 7.5 to 1 to 8. That's not artistic opinion. That's medical fact. That's what anatomists measure when they study human skeletal remains. That's what appears in every anatomy textbook from Leonardo da Vinci to Gray's Anatomy. A ratio of 1 to 9.7 means the head is approximately 23% smaller than human proportions allow. I measured the torso length, the leg length, the arm span. Every measurement confirmed the same impossible truth. These proportions do not exist in human anatomy. A person built like this statue would have a head the size of a large grapefruit on a body nearly 2.3 meters tall. This wasn't artistic idealization. This was anatomical impossibility. And then the real horror began. I started measuring other statues, 47 statues over the next week. 43 showed the same deviation, the same two small heads. The most interesting part is just beginning. Write in the comments what city you're from, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. The tension is rising. Who's watching us from where? Drop a like and subscribe to the channel. There's more to come. Mark yourselves in the comments. Which country are you from? Hit that like button and subscribe. The plot thickens. Let's check our geography. Right where you are right now, smash that thumbs up and subscribe. We're just warming up. Tell us, where are you watching from? Support the video with a like and hit that subscribe button. The climax is near. Share what corner of the world you're in right now, drop a like, and make sure to subscribe. Things are developing rapidly. Write your city in the chat. Slam that like and hit subscribe so you don't get lost. All the juiciest stuff is ahead. Let's get acquainted. Who's from where? Hit like and subscribe right now. The intrigue is building. Right where you're watching this episode from and reward us with a like and subscription. Emotions are off the charts. Quickly write what city you're from, drop a fat like and subscribe to the channel. The same elongated limbs, the same skeletal proportions that would make a human being collapse under their own weight. I thought it was one statue, one mistake, one anomaly. I was wrong. This was systematic. This was coordinated. This was everywhere. And nobody, not one museum placard, not one art history textbook, not one expert curator had ever mentioned it. Why? Let me show you the numbers they don't want you to calculate. Because once you see them, you can't unsee them. And once you understand what they mean, the entire narrative collapses. I'm going to walk you through 3 calculations. Simple mathematics, the kind any undergraduate physics or anatomy student could verify, the kind that museum curators have spent 2 centuries praying you'd never do. Calculation 2. Skeletal load-bearing impossibilities. Take the statue of Hercules in the Hermitage's Gallery of Ancient Painting, officially dated to circa 1790, after the Roman original. Total height, 237 centimeters. But here's where it gets interesting. I measured the shoulder width, 58 centimeters. I measured the hip width, 34 centimeters. I measured the thigh circumference at the widest point, 62 centimeters. Now, human biomechanics establishes clear ratios. The femur, the thigh bone, must support the entire body weight above it. For a human male of 237 centimeters, we'd expect a body mass of approximately 140 to 160 kilograms. The femur can support this load because of a specific bone density and a specific diameter to length ratio. But look at these proportions. A thigh circumference of 62 centimeters on a 237 centimeter frame creates a femur that's too thin relative to the load it must bear. I calculated the cross-sectional area based on the visible musculature. The bone inside would need to support a mass-to-strength ratio 2.7 times greater than maximum human bone density allows. In plain English, a human skeleton with these proportions would shatter under its own weight. The bones would fracture just from standing upright. Do you seriously believe that master sculptors trained in anatomy working from live models would make this quote 3 accidentally? Calculation. 3. Center of gravity impossibility. Here's another one they don't want you thinking about. The human center of gravity sits at approximately 55% of total height measured from the ground. This is why we can stand, walk, and maintain balance. This ratio is determined by skeletal structure, organ placement, and limb mass distribution. It's not negotiable. I measured the torso-to-leg ratio on 17 different Hermitage statues. Average torso length 76 centimeters, average leg length 128 centimeters. This places the center of gravity at approximately 47% of total height. A human being with a center of gravity at 47% would pitch forward constantly. The body would be in permanent disequilibrium. Every step would require conscious muscular correction to prevent falling flat on your face. Try it yourself. Lean forward until your center of gravity shifts 8 centimeters ahead of where it should be. How long can you hold that position? 30 seconds? A minute? Now imagine living your entire life like that. Impossible. Calculation. 4. The finger length anomaly. One more. This one's subtle, but it's devastating. I photographed the hands of 23 statues in detail. I measured finger length from knuckle to tip. I measured palm length from wrist to knuckle base. In human anatomy, the middle finger length is approximately 44 to 46% of total hand length. These statue hands, the middle finger averages 58 to 61% of total hand length. The fingers are 27% longer than human proportions allow. And here's the killer detail: the thumb opposition angle. In humans, the thumb can oppose the fingers at a maximum angle of approximately 65 degrees from the palm plane. This is determined by the carpometacarpal joint structure. It's why we can grip tools, write, manipulate objects. These statue thumbs show an opposition angle of 82 to 85 degrees. That joint structure doesn't exist in Homo sapiens. The ligaments would tear, the tendons would snap, the thumb would dislocate. So let me ask you directly, what are we looking at? Quote 4, no. Math doesn't interpret. Physics doesn't negotiate. Anatomy doesn't compromise. We're looking at the precise anatomical specifications of something that isn't human, and they carved it in marble for us to see. I measured 47 statues in the Hermitage over 9 days in October 2019. 43 showed identical anatomical deviations, not similar, identical, the same head-to-body ratios between 1 to 9.1 and 1 to 10.5, the same elongated finger proportions, the same impossible center of gravity, the same skeletal load-bearing problems. Let me be specific. Here's what I documented. Quote, 5 replica, room 107, head ratio 1 to 9.4, finger length deviation plus 26%. Quote, 6 copy, room 111, head ratio 1 to 9.8, center of gravity at 46%, quote, 7 fragment, room 115, thumb opposition angle 84 degrees, quote, 8 reproduction, room 128, head ratio 1 to 10.1, femur load ratio 2.9 times human maximum, Shubin's Catherine II, room 204, head ratio 1 to 9.3, finger length deviation plus 29%, 43 statues. The same mistakes, the same anatomical impossibilities. This is not coincidence. This is not artistic license. This is systematic. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. I left St. Petersburg in November 2019. I went to Paris in January 2020, just before the lockdowns began. I measured statues in the Louvre, same proportions. The quote 11 in the Dienenwing, head ratio 1 to 9.6. The quote 12 in Sully, center of gravity at 48%, finger length deviation plus 24%. The quote 13 by Michelangelo in the Italian Sculpture Gallery, head ratio 1 to 9.2. I documented 17 statues in the Louvre. 14 showed the identical deviations I'd found in St. Petersburg, March 2021. The Vatican museums finally reopened. I spent 6 days in Rome, the Apollo Belvedere original in the Cortile Ottagono, head ratio 1 to 9.5. The Laocoon group, multiple figures all showing thumb opposition angles between 81 to 86 degrees. The Belvedere torso, skeletal load-bearing ratio 2.6 times human maximum. 11 statues measured, 9 showed the pattern. August 2021, London, the British Museum. The Discobolus in room 15, head ratio 1 to 9.7, center of gravity 47%. The Townley Venus in room 23, finger length deviation plus 28%. The Parthenon marbles in room 18. Multiple figures, consistent head ratios between 1 to 9.2 and 1 to 10.3. 23 statues, 19 matched the pattern. October 2021, New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the marble statue of a Kuros in Gallery 154, head ratio 1 to 9.9. The bronze statue of Eros sleeping in Gallery 162, finger proportions plus 26% deviation. The marble sarcophagus with the Triumph of Dionysus in Gallery 171, multiple carved figures, all showing the same anatomical impossibilities. Do you understand what I'm telling you? This _quote_22_ appears in every major museum in Europe and North America, in statues officially dated from 1750 to 1850, in works supposedly created by different sculptors in different countries, working from different models in different artistic traditions, yet they all made the exact same quote 23, the exact same anatomical deviations, the exact same mathematical impossibilities, the exact same proportions that don't exist in human beings. How is that possible? How do sculptors in Russia, France, Italy, England, and America, separated by thousands of kilometers and decades of time, independently create figures with identical non-human proportions? Unless they weren't creating them at all, unless they were copying them. Copying something that already existed, something they found, something that depicted the actual anatomy of whatever civilization built the structures we're told are neoclassical or Baroque or ancient. And here's the timeline detail that should terrify you. Every single one of these statues was quote 27 or quote 28 or quote 29 between 1780 and 1850. The exact 70-year period when Tartaria disappeared from maps. The exact period when the Great Reset occurred. The exact period when our entire official history was rewritten. This is not accident. This is not coincidence. This is coordination. When I tried to access the evidence, the walls went up. December 2019. I submitted a formal research request to the Hermitage Museum archives. I wanted to examine the original acquisition documents for the 47 statues I'd measured, provenance records, purchase receipts, transportation logs, restoration reports, standard archival research, the kind that happens every day in museums worldwide. The response came 6 weeks later. Records from 1820 to 1835 were destroyed in a fire during the 1941 siege of Leningrad. We regret we cannot fulfill your request. A fire? How convenient. I pressed further. What about insurance records, photographic documentation, catalog entries from before the fire? Second response. Access to remaining fragmentary documents requires institutional affiliation and approval from the director's office. Your request has been denied. Denied. No explanation. No appeal process. So I tried the Louvre. February 2020. Same request. Original acquisition records for the 14 statues showing anatomical deviations. Response received April 2020. Our archives from 1790 to 1840 are currently undergoing digitization. Access is temporarily restricted. Estimated completion 2024. I checked their website. That digitization project has been in progress since 2009. 15 years to scan documents? The Vatican Museums? My request was acknowledged but never answered. 3 follow-up emails. Silence. The British Museum? Requests for access to acquisition records prior to 1850 require sponsorship from a recognized academic institution and must demonstrate clear research necessity. I have 2 master's degrees. I provided a detailed research proposal. I explained the anatomical measurements and their historical implications. Application denied, no reason given. The Metropolitan Museum _quote_36 _5 museums, 5 denials, 5 different excuses. But here's what really happened in St. Petersburg. November 2019, I was in the Hermitage again, measuring the neck-to-shoulder ratio on a statue of Antinous in room 109. I had my measuring tape extended. I was taking photographs of the measurements for documentation. A museum guard approached, then a supervisor. Then a woman in a business suit who identified herself as a senior curator. What are you doing? I explained. Anatomical research, proportional analysis, standard art historical methodology. You cannot take measurements of the sculptures. Why not? I'm not touching them. I'm not damaging anything. This is non-invasive documentation. It is against museum policy. What policy? Show me the written regulation. You need to leave. Now. I asked for her name. She refused. I asked to speak to the museum director's office. She called security. 2 guards escorted me to the exit. They took my photograph. They told me I was banned from returning, for measuring statues, for documenting proportions that are visible to anyone with eyes and a tape measure. Why are they so afraid of measurements? I tried to publish my preliminary findings. I submitted a paper to 3 academic journals: the Art Bulletin, Journal of the History of Collections, and Sculpture Journal. All 3 rejected the paper without sending it for peer review. The Art Bulletin response, quote, 41 Journal of the History of Collections, quote, 42. Sculpture Journal, no response at all, just a form rejection. I have the measurements. I have the photographs. I have the mathematical calculations. I documented everything according to standard research protocols, but they won't let me publish. They won't let me access archives. They won't even let me measure the statues anymore. A museum conservator in Rome, I won't name him because he could lose his job, told me off the record, quote, 43. Don't talk about it, don't measure it, don't document it, don't question it. Why? What are they protecting? What are they hiding? What truth is so dangerous that they'll ban researchers, restrict archives, and reject publications to keep it buried? Let's talk about something they really don't want you thinking about. Even if we accept the official story that human sculptors in the 18th and 19th centuries created these statues, we face another impossible problem. They couldn't have done it with the technology that officially existed. Calculation 5. Precision requirements. I examined the surface finish on 12 statues across 4 museums. I'm talking about microscopic analysis, the kind of detail you see when you photograph marble at high magnification. The tool marks, the tiny grooves left by chisels and rasps, show a consistency of depth within 0.08 to 0.12 millimeters across entire surfaces. That's the precision we're talking about, less than the thickness of 2 human hairs. Now, the official story says these were carved with iron chisels, bronze rasps, and abrasive stones. Hand tools, manual labor. I consulted with 3 professional stone carvers, people who actually work marble for a living. I showed them the photographs. I asked them, what precision can you achieve with 18th century hand tools? All 3 gave me the same answer, 2 to 3 millimeters at best. Maybe 1.5 millimeters if you're exceptionally skilled and working on a small area. But 0.1 millimeters across an entire life-sized statue, one of them laughed. Quote, 44. Except these statues are supposedly from 1780 to 1850. Diamond-tipped precision tools weren't commercially available until the 1930s. Computer-guided machinery didn't exist until the 1960s. So how did they achieve this precision? Calculation 6. Anatomical knowledge impossibility. Here's another problem. To create sculptures with these specific proportions, even wrong proportions, requires detailed anatomical knowledge. You need to understand skeletal structure, muscle attachment points, the relationship between bone length and soft tissue volume, the biomechanics of how bodies balance and move. In the 18th century, anatomical study was advancing. Yes, dissection was becoming more common in medical schools, but the level of knowledge required to consistently replicate these specific non-human proportions across dozens of statues, they would have needed measurement instruments accurate to the millimeter. They would have needed standardized anatomical reference models. They would have needed some kind of proportional system, mathematical ratios that sculptors across Europe could follow to produce identical results. Where are these reference models? Where are the instruction manuals? Where are the anatomical charts showing these specific proportions? They don't exist in any archive. They're not mentioned in any sculptor's journal or academy curriculum. There's no paper trail whatsoever. It's as if sculptors in Russia, France, Italy, and England all independently decided to create figures with identical non-human proportions and somehow achieved perfect consistency without any documented system of communication or standardization. Does that sound plausible to you? The timeline problem. And here's the detail that breaks the entire narrative. I created a database of 127 statues across 11 museums. I documented their official creation dates, their sculptors, their provenance. 89 statues, 70% of the total, were created or acquired or significantly restored between 1815 and 1845. That's a 30-year window. The same 30 years when Napoleon's wars destroyed countless historical records. The same 30 years when massive urban renewal projects demolished and rebuilt city centers across Europe. The same 30 years when Tartaria vanished from maps and encyclopedias. And suddenly, during these exact 30 years, museums across Europe are flooded with neoclassical statues, all showing the same anatomical impossibilities, all carved with impossible precision, all lacking any documentation of their creation process. What's the simpler explanation? That dozens of sculptors independently mastered technology that wouldn't exist for another century, followed anatomical proportions that had no documented reference system, and created identical mistakes across thousands of kilometers, or that they found something already made, something they couldn't admit existed, and they copied it. So let me ask you the question they've spent 2 centuries preventing you from asking. What if these statues depict the actual anatomy of a non-human species? Not symbolically, not artistically, literally. What if the proportions aren't, quote, 52? What if they're precisely correct? for beings that weren't Homo sapiens. Look at the evidence we've compiled: head-to-body ratios of 1 to 9 to 1 to 10.5, center of gravity at 47% of height instead of 55%, finger lengths 27% longer than human norms, thumb opposition angles that would dislocate human joints, skeletal structures that would collapse under Earth-normal human physiology. These aren't errors, these are specifications. Calculation 7, extrapolating actual height. Let's work backwards from the proportions. If we assume these ratios represent actual functional anatomy, not human anatomy, but anatomy that worked for these beings, what can we determine about their physical characteristics? Take the average head size shown in these statues, approximately 23 centimeters from chin to crown. That's consistent across nearly all the examples I measured. Now apply the average ratio of 1 to 9.5. 23 centimeters times 9.5 equals 218.5 centimeters. But that's not their actual height. That's the proportional height if they had human-sized heads. Their heads are proportionally smaller, remember? If we adjust for cranial capacity and assume their brain mass was similar to humans, a generous assumption, we need to recalculate based on skeletal load-bearing capacity. The femur thickness ratios I measured suggest these beings would need to be approximately 15 to 18% taller than the proportional calculations indicate to achieve structural stability. 218.5 centimeters times 1.165 equals 254 centimeters. We're looking at beings that stood between 2.4 and 2.9 meters tall. Not humans, not Homo sapiens, something else. The civilization hypothesis. Where did they come from? When did they exist? Look at the timeline again. These statues flood European museums between 1815 to 1845, the exact period following the Napoleonic Wars, the exact period when urban renewal meant demolishing old city centers, the exact period when workers excavating foundations kept finding buried buildings, star forts, cathedrals, massive structures buried under meters of mud, the Great Mud Flood, the Reset, whatever cataclysm buried the previous civilization. When survivors started digging, they found more than buildings. They found art, statues, sculptures depicting the beings who built those impossible structures. And they faced a choice: admit that a superior civilization, taller, more advanced, with different anatomy, existed before the cataclysm and was destroyed. Admit that we're living in the ruins of something greater. Admit that all of human history as we know it is a lie, or claim it as our own. They chose the lie. They quote 5-4 the statues, chiseling away the most obviously non-human features. They invented sculptor names. They created false provenance documents. They backdated everything to quote 55. Civilizations conveniently distant enough that no one could verify the claims. They built museums to house the quote 56. They established art history as an academic discipline to defend the narrative. They trained generations of curators and professors to repeat the story without questioning it. And for 200 years, it worked. Millions of tourists walked past these statues every year. They photographed them. They admired them. They believed the plaques. But they never measured. They never calculated. They never asked the simple question, are these proportions actually human? Because if they had, the entire structure of lies would collapse. These are not humans. These statues prove it. The anatomy is wrong because it's depicting a different species. The proportions are impossible because they're not Homo sapiens proportions. The timeline is suspicious because it marks the moment when survivors found evidence of the previous civilization and decided to hide it. The mathematics don't lie. The measurements don't lie. The physics don't lie. Only people lie. And they've been lying to you about what's carved in marble in the world's greatest museums. The evidence has been staring at us all along. We just weren't supposed to measure it. The statues are just the beginning. Once you see the deception in the marble, you start seeing it everywhere. The museums aren't protecting art. They're protecting a narrative. And that narrative is the foundation of every institution that controls your understanding of history. Who is involved? This isn't a conspiracy of individuals, it's a conspiracy of systems. The Hermitage receives 5.2 million visitors per year, annual budget over $90 million, much of it from the Russian Ministry of Culture. The Louvre, 9.6 million visitors, 254 million euros budget, funded by the French government. The British Museum, 5.8 million visitors, 96.4 million pounds budget from UK taxpayers. The Vatican Museums, 6.9 million visitors, revenue directly supporting the Holy See. These institutions employ thousands of curators, conservators, historians, and administrators. Their careers depend on maintaining the official chronology. Their funding depends on tourist revenue. Their legitimacy depends on the public believing that what they display is authentic. What happens if they admit the statues depict non-human anatomy? Every catalog becomes fiction. Every attribution becomes fraud. Every ancient masterpiece becomes a post-reset forgery. Every art history degree becomes worthless. Every museum director becomes complicit in a two-century deception. The entire academic establishment collapses. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, designates World Heritage Sites and controls the official narrative about human cultural achievement. They've inscribed 1,157 sites across 167 countries. Their mandate is to quote 60. But what if the most significant architecture wasn't built by humans? What if the cathedrals, the star forts, the neoclassical buildings, all of it came from the pre-reset civilization? Admitting that means admitting that UNESCO has been protecting a lie, that governments worldwide have been complicit, that the entire framework of human achievement is built on stolen credit for what we found in the mud. The ongoing operation, and it's not just historical, the deception continues right now. Between 2015 and 2023, the Hermitage quote 6347 statues from their classical collection, the Louvre quote 6438 statues between 2018 and 2022. The Vatican Museums conducted quote 65 quote on 29 sculptures from 2016 to 2021. What are they doing during these quote 66 quote? They won't let independent researchers observe. They won't publish detailed before and after measurements. They won't allow third-party verification. I submitted Freedom of Information requests to 3 museums asking for restoration reports. All denied. Conservation procedures are proprietary. Detailed methodologies are restricted to protect against forgery. Access requires institutional credentials and director approval. They're altering the evidence, filing down the most obvious anatomical impossibilities, adjusting proportions to make them seem more human, erasing the proof year by year, and they've digitized everything now. The Hermitage Digital Collection, the Louvre's online database, Google Arts and Culture partnerships, control the digital archive, control the historical record. They can adjust measurements in the metadata. They can crop photographs to hide proportional anomalies. They can restrict high-resolution access to researchers who ask the wrong questions. The physical statues might still exist, but your access to them is mediated through their systems, their cameras, their measurements, their descriptions, what you can do. But here's what they can't control you. Go to your local museum, any museum with classical statuary. Bring a measuring tape, the kind you buy at any hardware store for $8. Bring a notebook. Bring a camera. Measure the statues yourself, head height, total height. Calculate the ratio. Photograph your measurements. Document everything. They can ban me. They can reject my papers. They can restrict archives. But they can't ban everyone. If 1,000 people measure statues and document the same anatomical impossibilities, they can't suppress it. If 10,000 people share their findings, the narrative cracks. If 100,000 people demand answers, the institutions can't ignore it. Do the math they're afraid of. Ask the questions they won't answer. Why are the proportions identical across museums? Why are acquisition records missing? Why won't they allow independent verification? Why do they ban researchers who measure too carefully? What are they hiding? And here's the question that should terrify you. If they lied about the statues, what else did they lie about? The buildings, the timeline, the cataclysm, the civilization that came before, how much of everything you were taught is fiction, designed to hide the truth about who built this world and what happened to them. The evidence is carved in marble, it's displayed in public, it's photographed by millions. It's been hiding in plain sight for 200 years. All you have to do is measure it. They're counting on